Self-talk has to be one of the biggest topics that I find within athletes after you've kind of broken past the physical skills, and it's probably the biggest part of an athlete's longevity and success, allowing yourself to understand your self-talk, change your self-talk, know when you're using it in the right or wrong way at certain situations can be a huge change and huge advantage as an athlete in getting to whether it's the top or as far as you hope to get in your sport. And something that if you can really work on and understand, then you're putting yourself into a smaller percentage of athletes out there. You're really working on the bits that others sometimes aren't even willing to work on, because taking that awareness and understanding it takes work. It's a skill. It really is a skill in understanding your self-talk and developing it. For me, my journey with my self-talk has been a massive up and down, like any athlete. And any athlete that I've seen that's made it to the top and done well, or has always had those ups and downs. They've had the negative, they've had the positive. There's never really been someone that I've ever seen that has had positive self-talk all the time. And that's really worth noting, that you're not going to have positive self-talk all of the time. This whole podcast and this whole episode is about understanding where your mind is at a certain time, what the self-talk is at a certain situation, and whether it's being helpful or hurtful at that time. And then once you have understood it, once you've seen it for what it is, then you can actually start to do something about it, and you can hopefully change it if needed, or you can maintain it if it's actually working for you at the right time. So that's a big part of this, is understanding where your self-talk is at any one time. But for most of us, we do hang out in that negative self-talk column far too much. It's just how our brains are wired. We wire ourselves towards a much more negative bias than anything else. And there's almost no getting away from it. So if you're having negative self-talk, if you find yourself speaking to yourself, whether it's externally or internally in a negative way, don't worry about it. It happens to the best out there. It's really about where you go from there and understanding how you can make yourself better by just understanding what your self-talk is. My own self-talk, again, like I was mentioning, was up and down throughout my career. If I look back at when I was a young player, I probably didn't recognize at the time where my self-talk was at. I reckon I used to kid myself a little bit by thinking that I was always super positive, always in that positive column and really working hard. But actually, there was huge amounts of self-doubt, huge amounts of lack of self-confidence, and the inner chatter was really fear-based a lot of the time. And I think as I got older, and that's through experience, I started to understand where that self-talk was coming from and how I could perhaps change it at certain times. And there are always times when I think I got it right, but I also got it wrong. And I think about some of my best performances. I was in really great minds, in a space, in a frame of mind. And then days where I was really struggling, I was definitely out of it. Wasn't anything, it didn't necessarily have to be anything physical or technical. It really was where my mind was at, and then where my self-talk was on that time, and where I valued myself. So you're going to have those ups and downs. That is just a almost non-negotiable. But like I said, we're going to explore understanding when your self-talk can be helpful and when it can be hurtful. And notice that it's not always, we're not talking about positive and negative, because you can have positive self-talk that is not always helpful, and not all negative self-talk is hurtful. You might be performing poorly, let's say, for example, and you may say to yourself, I've got this, when in reality you haven't actually got it, and you end up not doing anything about what you're meant to be doing, and you're not doing anything productive. So that becomes hurtful. That positive phrase, I got this, becomes hurtful. But you could also say, hey, I'm sucking right now. That is a that is a negative phrase, but it's actually bringing a reality into it. And then from that, you can say, let's go to work. So you can see that is a negative phrase, but it becomes really helpful. So not all self-talk, whether it's positive or negative, like I said, it doesn't have to be positive and be helpful. It doesn't have to be negative and hurtful. It really depends on the context that it's coming from. So you understanding whether the context in which you're using it, the time in which you use it, is all individual and all relative to what we're going through. Try not to kid yourself. Try not to take reality out of it. Stay within reality as much as you can. And then you'll understand that self-talk is doing the right thing for you. The reason I use something like meditation and mindfulness as a way to understand your self-talk, and this was the biggest change that I personally have found and what I've taught athletes and athletes I've spoken to, when you spend time looking at your thoughts, you begin to understand them. And like any practice that you do, again, mindfulness and meditation is a practice, it's a skill of understanding and seeing your thoughts for what they are. You can start to understand them more. And the more time you spend practicing looking at your thoughts and understanding them, then you'll get to understand them better and be able to do more about them. Because if you're not spending that time and you're perhaps allowing your thoughts to take control and then allowing that emotion to take control, if it's a negative self-talk, you're not putting sort of a spanner in the spokes of the wheel at any one time. You're just allowing that wheel to just go, and you're not stopping it in its tracks in order to shift it back to that positive frame of mind. And know that you can do that if you build that skill of understanding where your thoughts are or where your mind is at any one time. And mindfulness and meditation allows you to do that. So you can use meditation to develop your self-talk. You can use mindfulness to develop your self-talk. And I'll give you 3 examples. I'll give you 3 things that you can do in order to help develop them. The first one would be take 5 minutes. And the first 2 are kind of very similar. The first one would be take 5 minutes, spend that 5 minutes without distraction, get everything out of the way, and just sit there with a piece of paper or pieces of paper and just allow every thought that you have for the next 5 minutes to come in and write it down. Physically write it down. Write it as you hear yourself say it to yourself. Write it down, move it along, sit there. If nothing comes for a minute or so, but believe me, something will turn up. Wait, and then once you see it, hear it. It could be the frustration of the noise outside. It could be the frustration of someone around you, or you've sinned in that day. Whatever it comes up, or the gratitude you feel for where you're at. Anything that comes up, just write it down. And then after that, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or 15 minutes, I just use 5 minutes as an example. It may take longer if you start getting on a roll. And then you can literally physically see those thoughts. If writing them down isn't something you want to do, then spending that 5 minutes just in meditation, and again, taking that distraction away and just allowing those thoughts to come into your mind, almost like cars or buses turning up at a bus stop. The bus arrives, you see it, and then you let it go. You're just noting what that bus, in inverted commas, is and what it says, and then allowing it to move on. And by taking yourself into that third person view, you take yourself out of it. Hopefully you take the judgment out of it, and then you're able to understand it and just look at what it's saying. And then from there, you can build a bit more of an understanding of whatever that is saying, what you could do about it. And then lastly would be using something like mantras. Mantras are really common and affirmations that athletes may say to themselves. And it's something that you want to shift into. And you can use these, again, you can practice them in a sort of a mindful and a meditative way where you just sit and repeat the phrase over to you. So it could be something like, I am confident. I also, a bit of a side note here, I also recommend if you use something like, say, I am confident, is to link it with an emotion. So if you think of, again, I'll use I am confident as an example. Think of a time when you were confident. What did it look like? How did it feel? And then you can link that emotion to it. So when you say the phrase, it doesn't mean, it means more rather than just saying the words and not having anything, a feeling associated to it. So if you're going to use a mantra, try to have a feeling and emotion linked to it and then repeat it over and over again. You could then take that straight away into your training, into your games or competition. And then when you feel and have that negative self-talk cropping up, then you can go back to it and you can use it. It might be for a split second. Processes are a big part of what drive athletes, and using a mantra to like trigger yourself back into your process can be a really, really powerful way of doing that. But if you want to find a mantra, you need to practice it, and you need to practice saying it and using it. And again, like I said, it having a meaning and a feeling towards yourself and your game. So hopefully there's something there for you to be able to take out of, where you can understand where your self-talk is coming from. Like I said, the biggest gain from this is just having the awareness of where your self-talk is at. Whether the self-talk that you're having is being helpful or hurtful, and it doesn't matter if it's positive or negative at the time, it's whether it is the right thing for that right situation, and then what's the action you can do after it. And hopefully those 3 ways in which you could perhaps start to practice understanding where your self-talk is at. So if you've enjoyed this podcast, let me know. Reach out to me on Instagram at Lewis Hatchett. You can also head over to my website, lewishatchett.com/podcast. Get in touch. Let me know if this has helped you out, and also if there's anything else in your game, in your training, your competition that you want help with. But thanks again for listening, and I will see you guys next time.